Welcome to the Visual Storytelling Podcast. Let's discuss the best lens for taking portraits on an APS-C sensor camera. Today's episode comes by way of a question I was asked. So I thought I would provide my answer on the podcast, as I'm sure the person asking the question is probably not the only person wondering the same thing. So before we start discussing today's topic, it's probably best to begin by explaining what an APS-C sensor is. So APS stands for Advanced Photo System, and the C is referenced to its type. For example, APS-C digital cameras are roughly the equivalent in size to the APS film negatives in its classic format, and this is where the C comes from. Devices with APS-C sensors are known as cropped frame or cropped sensor. So because APS-C sensors are smaller, cameras can be made more compact and lighter, which is ideal for street and travel photography. More recently, mirrorless cameras, I would suggest, are probably even lighter than the APS-C cameras, so they would also be probably just as good, if not better, for you to take on street and travel photography, just because they're so much lighter and it doesn't feel like you're going to be having a workout. So now let's move on to answering the question. For APS-C sensor cameras, a prime lens with a moderate focal length and a wide aperture is often preferred for portrait photography. So a 50mm or an 85mm prime lens with an aperture of f1.8 or wider, so a lower f number, can be an excellent choice. These lenses allow for a shallow depth of field, which helps to isolate the subject and create beautiful background blur, also known as bokeh, making your portrait stand out. So if you're shooting on an APS-C camera, to replicate the look of a 50mm on a full frame camera, you are going to want to choose a focal length of 75mm. The equivalent 85mm lens would be 127.5mm, so you drop that down to 120mm. However, the best lens can also depend on your specific style and preferences. Some photographers prefer a slightly wider lens, like a 35mm f1.8, for environmental portraits that capture more of the surroundings. The equivalent to the 35mm on an APS-C camera would be a 50mm. Ultimately, it's essential to consider your shooting style and the look you want to achieve when choosing a lens for portrait photography on an APS-C camera. My suggestion would be to save yourself some money and buy the 24 to 200mm zoom lens, which will cover you across 35mm, 50mm and 85mm equivalent focal lengths, allowing you to experiment and find what best suits your style. Hopefully this has answered the question. The key thing to remember when undertaking photography is that anything people suggest are simply that, they're suggestions. The lenses I've mentioned are a good starting point, but ultimately go out and explore your creativity, push boundaries and try to be different. I love answering your photography related questions, so if you have anything you would like answered or discussed, then ask away and I'll do my utmost to provide you with a to the point response that will hopefully not only answer your question, but offer you clarity as well. You can leave a question here on the podcast or contact me through either X or Threads at GaryFernon. And don't forget to follow the podcast so as not to miss out on not only new episodes, but catch up on previous episodes you may have missed or simply wish to listen to again. It genuinely does make a difference. Until next time, be creative, be inspired, be you.